Hello, Renegade marketers. It's Drew, your host. Who else? Here to introduce a very special episode of Renegade Marketers Unite. Now, I know what you're thinking. They're all special. And they are all special, but this one's a bit different because we have not one interview, but three with three CFOs about the all-important CMO-CFO relationship. Ask any CMO where the budget comes from. They'll tell you it's about the CFO. And these are not people who necessarily understand marketing. Now, the three CFOs that you will hear on the show get it. It's Chris Andersen of Aquia, Nicole Anasenes of Ansys, and John Evarts of Mediafly, who went on from CFO to become president and COO of that company. These conversations were recorded during a super huddle, one of our biannual mega huddles exclusively for our CMO Huddles community. Now, after each of these conversations with the CFOs at the huddle broke out and talked about strategies for building stronger relationships with their CFOs, how they could build trust, the kinds of things that they could put into action that would help them when it was really time to scrub those budgets and help the CFO understand the impact of marketing as an investment, not an expense. Anyway, if you're a CMO who can share, care, and dare with the best of them, do us a favor and go visit cmohuddles.com and see if you qualify for a guest pass. All right, let's get on to the episode. I really hope you enjoy it. Thank you, huddlers. You all rock. And I thank you for your ongoing commitment to sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness. Ken Blanchard famously said, "None of us is as smart as all of us." And to that, I say, together, we're pretty darn smart. This community knows how to build demand generation engines in their sleep, though not necessarily how to get more sleep. This community knows how to build unbeatable B2B brands, and many of you are commemorated doing just that in my upcoming book, Renegade Marketing, 12 Steps to Building Unbeatable B2B Brands. But what really makes this community special is your unwavering commitment to continuous learning, your willingness to challenge your own assumptions, your curiosity, not just about all things marketing, but about all things leadership. It takes courage just to be a CMO today. And it takes even more to be a great one. It is in the pursuit of greatness that brings us together today, pointing the spotlight on your relationship with your CFO. But why that topic? After your relationship with your CEO, which we highlighted in Super Huddle 2, it is easy to make the case that no other relationship can contribute more to your success than the one you have with your CFO. It's not just that they either control or influence how much your department can spend on staffing, technology, vendors, and media. It's that with your CFO as an ally, your chances of gaining and keeping the trust of the rest of the executive committee and board skyrockets. And without that trust, forget about driving purpose, building brand, and doing anything else truly transformative. So let's take a quick look at the current state of your CFO relationships. In the poll we fielded last month, 90% of you acknowledge that your CFO plays a critical role in the marketing budget approval process, but only 40% have worked on an ROI model with your CFO. 53% strongly agree that you have an effective working relationship with your CFO. That's awesome. But only 19% strongly agree that my CFO supports me during board meetings. Not so awesome. 44% strongly agree that my CFO believes in marketing. Kind of awesome. But only 22% strongly agree that my CFO believes in investing brand. A Forrester study on the CMO and CFO alliance points to a similar disconnect when it comes to CMO and CFO priorities, but it offers lots of hope. Here's my favorite quote from that report. If marketing is to be seen as an embedded contributor to the business, CMOs can no longer be on the defensive about the challenges of marketing measurement and business alignment. They should instead go on the offensive with the CFO by their side. Forrester also describes the spectrum of the CMO and CFO allyship, going from detached to associated to embedded. Our goal is to get you embedded, and embedded looks like this. CFOs play a role in marketing. CMOs have credible financial acumen. Marketing is perceived as a business driver, and the CMO is empowered to be bold. So our goal today is to help you identify the gaps in your relationship with your CFO, to help you put together an action plan, to help you move from being defensive to being on the offense without being offensive, of course. To get there, we will be meeting with 3 amazing CFOs. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Chris Andersen, CFO of Aquia. Before joining Aquia, Chris spent a combined 2 decades as VP of Finance at Akamai, Progress Software, and Novell. So Chris, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of the huddle today.
I do see that you have the Aquia logo behind you. You're on brand. What's funny, because when we had a pre-thing, you actually were wearing the brand. I thought that's pretty good indoctrination for CFO.
Trying to do my best.
Yes. All right. Well, when we spoke in August, you and your CMO, Lynn Capozzi, seem to have a very strong working relationship. Now that it's just the 2 of us, what's the real story? I mean, seriously, can you talk a little bit about your relationship and how it's evolved over the last 3 years?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I would actually say that my relationship with Lynn is one of the aspects of my job that I really enjoy. Probably the natural starting point for that relationship was working through budgets and forecasts. And I would say that's a good mechanism for a CFO to understand a CMO's priorities and thought processes. And then that working relationship really quickly accelerated for Lynn and myself. We had to work closely together about 2 years ago through a change in leadership and company ownership, actually, from venture capital to private equity. And I would say Lynn's input on positioning and messaging during that transaction were quite valuable, and it really helped fast track our relationship. And I would add that probably a familiar topic for this group, pipeline. That's been a long-term journey for Lynn and myself at Aquia. There's been a lot of ups and downs as we've tried to focus and improve our reporting and invest more in pipeline, a lot of readouts with the CEO, a lot of discussions about what's working and what's not working. So now after 3 years of working together, I think confidently say that Lynn and I look to each other as sounding boards, even in some cases confidants on a variety of topics and issues well beyond forecasting and pipeline. And then I would just add kind of at the end, because this is the lighthearted part, somehow along the way over the last 3 years, we've developed a banter and a competition between finance and marketing that's fairly visible at the company level, in company meetings, company videos with things we say and do, and jokes and comments. In fact, I would say it's probably even visible to the board of directors. And I think that makes the day-to-day part of the job a bit more fun.
Oh, that is fun. And that is an unexpected situation, because you don't actually think about fun coming out of finance. I mean, no offense.
Ouch. Ouch. That sounds like something Lynn would say to me.
I guess I kind of on her side a little bit here, but there are no sides. You've got a lot of things to do. Where does marketing spend management fit into your day-to-day activities?
I would say the good news is that marketing spend management is not at the top of my list of concerns. We have a strong CMO, great marketing team. Things are working well on the marketing team. The marketing team is well connected with the finance team through a business partner on my FP&A team. So as a result, when I do get a focus on marketing spend management, it's more strategic in nature. It's usually in conjunction with Lynn and our CEO. And I would say that as every CMO and CFO knows, marketing spend is rather unique. It can be dialed up, some cases down more quickly, and provide more immediate results than any other operational spend in the company. So I view marketing as a really strategic spend lever. So it's not really ever been a concern. It's really been more of an opportunity.
I'm interested in that, because strategic spend implies that you have the ability at any given time to put more money in or take more money out. And I'm curious, how do you look at that and make the determination with Lynn? Okay, this is worth putting more money here instead of say, oh, let's hire some more people or let's invest in product or, those other options where you can spend money.
Good question. I'd say there's probably two pieces to that. One, we spend a lot of time at this, as we do the planning to get the base in place for how we're going to message to the market, how we're going to get the brand set. And then where we often leverage up during the year when we have excess capacity, we actually set aside what we call dry powder in our plan. We're fairly transparent about it. It's funds that we can leverage as needed. And if we're doing well, what we've done this year is we've actually leveraged dry powder a few times for marketing. And it's really for demand gen, kind of mid-year, to help drive more opportunities, to help drive the pipeline and help hopefully accelerate top line growth for the year. So it's really what's our base for the year, and then what's our opportunity throughout the year to leverage some of that dry powder to accelerate growth.
And I love that expression, dry powder. And I can imagine all of the CMOs here writing that down and saying, okay, what are my dry powder plans? And do I have a CFO who actually will turn to me and ask about dry powder? One of the things that we talked about was your desire for predictability in terms of revenue-related outcomes. Can you talk about how you guys have worked on that challenge together?
Yeah, I would say one really good example was our approach to planning for this year. Coming out of COVID, Aquia is in a growth mode, like probably a lot of other companies in this huddle. And we made a really significant investment in sales capacity around the world. Pretty significant. Amazed that the board let us go that deep, so to speak, on the spend in sales. And as a result, we had to make sure Lynn's team was also properly funded to support the expected ROI from sales. So Lynn and I and our teams, we spent a lot of time late last year, early this year, making sure that marketing had sufficient budget to support the demand generation and to drive the market coverage needed to grow the top line this year, and what was really an aggressive plan. So that work really included new and improved pipeline modeling that we had to do. Another example was analysis of historical returns on demand gen activities to make sure that we were funding marketing appropriately, not just across activities, but across regions and across all the quarters, to get the timing right across the year to support those sales efforts. It really was a combined effort, I would say, among Lynn, myself, and our CRO, to make sure the sales and marketing plans were connected and well aligned, just given the level of investment and expected growth this year.
So I heard pipeline model in there, and obviously that's a really important part of getting you to predictable. And it feels like you two work on these things together, and that's a critical part of this whole thing. I'm just wondering, and we have a couple more minutes, what's your advice to other CMOs who want to gain credibility with their CFOs?
That's a good question. I think from my perspective, I would say it would be helpful if a CMO is willing to cross over and try to put themselves into the CFO's world and gain an appreciation of the growth and profitability pressures that the CFO faces with the board, with investors, and then try to frame marketing needs kind of in that lens, kind of put you in the same side of the boat, so to speak, with the CFO. But by the same token, I would say that, and hopefully I've tried to do this, that CFOs probably need to be willing to do the same and cross over into the CMO world and understand what they're trying to drive and the pressures they face, so that the CFO and the CMO can better understand each other.
Interesting. And there really is this crossing over where you get an understanding of marketing, Lynn has an understanding of finance and how the company makes money and how these investments could be made. One of the big issues that I think a lot of CMOs face is that marketing is absolutely just seen as an expense. And I just, it's a cost, it's a percent of revenue, period, and it's going to be a fixed cost. How did you get to see, or do you see marketing as an investment that could actually, again, as a choice?
Yeah, so every operating dollar we spend is an investment. Marketing is no exception. And, I think what's impressed me with Lynn and her team is their ability to show a return on every dollar spent. So that as we, if we need to drive the top line by X, they can come in and say we can spend Y to make that happen. And so it makes it very easy, especially as we're looking at dry powder, to think about what the return on that dry powder investment's going to be, because her team can come to the table with facts and figures and really help us appreciate that the money's going to be put to good use.
Chris, thank you so much for this input. It was invaluable. I really, really appreciate you spending time with us. We're going to move to our next speaker now. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Nicole Anasenes. She's the Senior Vice President and CFO at Ansys. Before joining Ansys 3 years ago, Nicole was the CFO and COO at Squarespace for 4 years and also enjoyed a long run at IBM before that. Hello, Nicole.
Hello, how are you all? Really nice to meet you.
It's nice, really nice to have you here. And I'm excited because I've always wanted to have a conversation with a CFO that approves spending on a Super Bowl ad.
Well, actually, I approved it 4 times.
4 times. Okay, so let's say at what, $2.5 million a piece? So that was 10 million in 2 minutes?
A little bit more than that. You got the match spend. It's, $2.5 million would have been easier to approve than what they actually cost.
So it was a lot more than that. So I'm just wondering, because that's the extreme that most of the CMOs in our Super Huddle today are sort of would dream about, having that level of awareness. How did the rationale go to get you to sort of approve that?
I think it goes back to the initial time the decision was made around Super Bowl spend. So just for some context, Squarespace, when I joined, was about 100 million in revenue. They had crossed the million customer mark, and they're very, I'd say, consumer-like SMB business, right? They enable people to present themselves online and transact online. The decision to do the first Super Bowl ad actually happened 3 years before. And at that point, when you look at the curve and you see the return on that investment, it was almost instantaneous, because the company went from being known in the podcast space and in kind of the more digital channels that the company participated in, to being more household name just as a result of that one ad. And so the impact of the Super Bowl ad had always been perceived as this unusual event that has an enormous amount of unpaid attribution and benefit to it. That was the argument why it was perpetuated year after year. The honest debate, as we got, certainly, it would have been 7 years into it or 6 years into it by my last ones, was what is the point of diminishing returns on something like that? Because you don't get, as all of you know, your initial brand. Well, when you do an initial brand launch like that, it's pretty pronounced and you can get these step functions of changes, but the marginal rate of improvement is diminishing. And so towards the end, we started to have debates overall. And actually, there was 1 year we decided not to do it. And it was really about, what do you have to surround that Super Bowl spend to really amplify the brand with? Because initially you get the bump, and then all of your hardworking marketing starts to get super, super efficient as a result. But when you're in those curves, you have to keep on upping the ante around the brand surrounding that one brand event. And so that was the decision framework around any of those ads, was really, if we're going to do it, are we going to commit to the brand surround and the always on drumbeat around that brand, to make sure that it's not just lighting a couple $1 million on fire, because you don't get the same benefit they got the first time they ran it.
Well, so now back to B2B reality,
Yes.
where that's not something that I'm imagining is going to be a conversation at Ansys. You're not going to necessarily buy a Super Bowl to sort of catapult the brand into sort of, mass consciousness. You and I talked about this perspective on just generally marketing as an investment versus marketing as a sort of fixed cost, and talk about this a little bit in terms of what it takes to get from this sort of fixed cost model, which is so often the case, to a variable based investment.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what we had talked about in our earlier discussion was, when any CFO has no understanding of how to connect an operational action to a financial outcome or return, it just becomes an expense in some internal negotiation, right? And this is true for marketing. It's true for non-quota carrying sales. It's true for product, right? And so then you start to do these efficiency metrics around, okay, well, what's the expense to revenue ratio associated with that? So the conversations tend to be not very strategic, very short, and not very insightful. And to the point that was made earlier by by the colleague who preceded me, it becomes the fungible thing that you can just shut off when you don't, when you need a roadmap, right? I think that the strategic way to have it be seen as a lever is to connect the dots to enable you to be able to explain, when we put this dollar in, we get these 10 out, right? And of course, to the point of the earlier discussion, the brand return is a little bit fuzzier to draw that connection than something a more hardworking channel, a direct response channel, AdWords, Google, something that is quantitative is a lot easier for a CFO to get the attention around to say, oh, okay, I see, you put this dollar in and you got 40 out, or you got these leads and these leads connect to this level of conversion over this time frame. Anything that allows you to connect the dots and build the model and say this operational action created these outcomes is going to be a lot easier for any financial organization to double down on something that you're going to get something out of. It's just a lot harder to do when that clarity isn't there, and then in the absence of clarity, you got to spend something, so you just limit it to the minimum required to not break the business, right? It's not rocket science, really.
So, and in that scenario, we talked about the fact that really becomes just a performance optimization job. You get 3% of revenue, you optimize the spend against something, and that's the CMO's sort of fate. Let's turn this around and talk about actually building an ROI model. Have you sort of been down that path with Lynn in terms of getting there so that marketing is seen more as an investment that you can sort of pump up or pump down?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the strategic path we're on together. I joined the company at the end of last year, and I took on the CFO role. I'm only in my second quarter now, so we're building towards that. Is kind of how I would characterize it, but that is the ideal. The ideal here is that you can connect the levers to outcomes in the short and the long term, because we look at the business at Ansys not just about, all right, how are we going to get to the quarter? We have a huge opportunity ahead of us in a multi-year vision, and so building brand over multiple years is something that is important to us, and so we need to look at it from both dimensions. I'd say the additional thing I would add was something that I thought was quite insightful by your last huddle report out there, which is don't forget the chief revenue officer, because the key to connecting those dots in a B2B direct enterprise-led sales force is if you can have the most amazing attribution metrics that some of us CFOs do understand, by the way, not all of us, but some of us understand those models on the front end, but it's garbage in, garbage out if you don't have consistency and clarity on the conversion cycle that you depend on. So if you're a consumer products company, it's the product conversion and the partnership with product. If you're an enterprise sales company, it's the conversion cycle around the direct sales force or the channel. Having that end-to-end view and the synchronization of it is really important, because you can put the gas on marketing. If we are dependent on direct sales teams to convert that marketing dollar and we don't invest in the direct side, it's not going to matter how awesome the marketing is, and it's going to be a terrible customer experience. And so we can't ignore the middle, and it is in an enterprise, it is highly interdependent across that whole, process cycle.
So you use the B word, as in brand. And this is a word that we've had in huddles over the last year, where I'm going to say 25% of the CMOs can't actually use that word in the board or with their investors, because it sounds like waste. It sounds like fluff. It's colors and design. If Lynn were to come in and say, you know what, our brand, we just don't have the awareness we need, and that's hurting us with some of our enterprise sales. Can you get yourself to sort of understand the power and what brand is and how to measure it as a CFO?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends the business model of the company, right? And who your target customer is. So in a quite transparent way, if our only focus was a core customer, which is the analyst, who is our traditional historical customer, where it is objectively a pretty focused, targeted group, generalizable brand strategies are not going to have a measurable impact on that, right? And so it is useful to have brand in a more micro sense targeted at those communities, whether it's print or whether it's those, where those communities go, but running a Super Bowl ad or even just generic, AdWord spend or bigger spend that is brand focused in messaging is not going to be as effective. Once the mission starts to expand to more generalizable audiences where you need the top of the funnel in order to drive the business model, in my view, that becomes a point where the role of brand is increasingly important because you can't have enough events and conferences and point-to-point interactions to be able to build your top of funnel marketing. And so I do think it depends on the business model. It depends on the size and the nature of the core customer and the channels by which they get their information and create consideration sets. And so I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all, because in different companies it's looked different. And even in different subsets of IBM, I would probably have a different view of brand than in others.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're about to go under a breakout and we're going to be looking for the top 3 ideas for building and maintaining a collaborative working relationship with your current CFO. Do you have any advice for these CMOs? Real quick, just 1 or 2 thoughts on how to build a more productive relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ideas that were said earlier were, I think, great ideas. So first of all, communicate, understand how each other's worlds, make sure that they understand your operational actions, make sure that you can partner to create a sense and a framework for how to think about what you're doing and what outcomes are being created, even if they can't be very quantitative, and be very consistent and repeatable. And deliberate about how you show results is, I think, well, this is just one opinion, but we're pretty formulaic. If you connect the dots and you connect the macro and the micro and put it in front of us, it's a lot easier to understand.
All right, perfect. All right, well, Nicole, thank you so much for being with us. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to John Evarts, who is currently the President and COO of Mediafly. John was the CFO of Mediafly for 10 years and was the president of the CFO Roundtable of Chicago for 3 years. So don't hold his promotion to COO against him. Anyway, John, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you. Thanks for this opportunity.
You were a CFO for a long time, and I'm curious if your perspective on marketing measurement and effectiveness has evolved over that time frame.
Definitely. I'm probably at the 5-year-old level now. I was kind of at 3, and now I'm probably at 5.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, so I think it definitely has evolved. I think part of the process, and we talk about it a lot today, right? We talk about education, right? And we talk about common language, and those are the things that I think are absolutely critical in progressing our clear understanding of kind of what are the important factors in driving the success of marketing initiatives, right? And so my view of, for instance, early stage, mid stage, and late stage has become much more, I'll say, literate as a result of partnering with Isabel. As a result of just kind of evolving in my own career, having worked with great CMOs.
At one point, initially when you started as CFO, did you see marketing was just an expense, and have you changed, and has it evolved in terms of your perspective on marketing as an investment? And if so, speak a little bit about what that means to you.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, I think I definitely did not have appreciation as much as I do now for brand. And I think, brand, again, it is so interesting because there is a lot of salesmanship around brand, right? Historically. And so a number of the CFOs that you're probably dealing with have been burned, right? That's the issue. It's not an issue that brand unto itself is a bad thing, right? This is about understanding why air cover is important and understanding what the lift that can be removed from the sales teams will be if you have great air cover, right? The ultimate air cover is millions of dollars of spend on a Super Bowl, right? Like that is air cover in its finest. But it's understanding like what are the different pieces that are necessary, what experiments can you run, small experiments. And I love that concept of experimentation, where you're thinking of a portfolio of experiments that you're running at any given time, and they're small, right? One of the comments that was made in one of the prior sessions is, don't make big asks if you don't have trust, And the reason why you don't make big asks is if you're only making small asks, the CFO is kind of indifferent in small dollar amounts, right? Different per company, right? 1,000 might be small for some and big for others, and 1 million may be small for some and big for others, right? But what does small mean? That is under the radar, but important to you so that you establish an experiment and understand and share and educate what that success metric will be when you say this worked or it didn't work, and you come back to them to earn that trust.
There's so many points of that I just want to put punctuation points on. Don't make big asks if you don't have trust. Okay. Then the part of the experimentation. And as you were talking, I mean, totally on board. We've talked a lot in huddles about having experiments. You even mentioned it. Caroline Tian Spalding had an experiment going prior to the pandemic and digital, and it turned out that ended up being her whole budget during the pandemic. So understand, and I think most of the CMOs here understand that. But I also wonder about this. Can you move the needle enough with these experiments with a $25,000 investment that it could then become a big bet? And I guess have you seen that happen where something you approved over the last 10 years, a small bet, under 100,000, that you were then able to sort of say, yeah, that worked great, go spend 4X or 10X?
Yeah, ABM, right? I mean, I think we've all started off with smaller bets around ABM. In any kind of way, shape, or form. And as we start to understand it more, and what pipeline we can drive, what visibility into deals, what competitive cycles, like where people are in their buying stages, right? Understanding that, getting that visibility and clarity is so valuable, right? And then to be able to capitalize on that and then make decisions from that. So again, it started off as a small experiment, right? It started off as, okay, we're going to try this out. We're going to test this out. Here's a small budget. It's less than 1 FTE, for instance, right? So I'm not worried about hiring an AE, right? I'm not worried about wallet share of hiring a sales rep versus a small bet in that case. Like that was my small bet. And so when we rolled out ABM, it was pretty clear. Isabel did a really nice job. Here's why I want to do it. Right? Here's the visibility I'm going to give to you. Here are the metrics that are going to be successful. And then relative to that success level, I'm going to come back and make more asks. And so by reserving the right to come back to me with the success level, when I achieve X, educate me what X is, right? Let me know what you think and what you're measuring your success against, that when we experience that success, yeah, it's a lot easier for me to make an increased budget allocation based on that, whether that's dry powder or whether that's marketing spend and reallocation.
Yeah, again, so many interesting, good points. Certainly, I think a lot of, it's funny because I think in one of our huddles, ABM was the big bet, but of course it had to start small. So that makes sense. I want to go back to something you said. So many CFOs have been burned. What does that look like? What does that mean? What was the action that sort of got you there?
Well, I think we've all probably experimented with this, right? And it's websites, right? Early on, and again, I'm now dating myself, right? But when we're rolling out a website or doing a refresh or any number of different things, there's often very little metrics associated with that, right? And if you don't have the discipline in figuring out what are the things that we need to do, right, when tackling websites, and this, we're probably talking, 10, 15 years ago now, right? If you're not giving what that success metric will be, then you have no idea if it's working or not, and you've just made a massive spend. Right. And so when the CFO says, hey, we just made this great investment, how did it go? And the answer is great. And you say, how do you know it went great? It's like, because we have a better brand now and we have a great new website. Look, that's the issue, is lots of times you run into things like vanity metrics that we don't want to use, right? Are you actually making the conversions, right? Are you actually getting the revenue? Are you actually progressing deals, right? These are the things that we want to see. These are the things that we want to hear about. I don't want to hear about impressions necessarily, unless impressions lead to something that I care about as a CFO. Right?
And it's funny, I wanted to get there. That was going to be my next question, because in the earlier part of the conversation that was, tell me what measures that you think are going to come out of this bet. And when we talked, it was What if the CMO doesn't give you a metric that you believe in? And how do you get to that common agreement? We're going to make this bet. We're going to do ABM. We think that ABM is going to help us sort of move, a small group of people through pipeline. I don't know, but I don't know what measures you actually put there. Is it with your CFO hat on? Is it anything close to revenue? Sounds like a good metric.
Yeah, right. I mean, the closer so I'll put it this way, right? The closer you get to revenue, right? And in our case, ARR, right? Depends on the business, right? The closer you get to that metric, the more likely I am to say, yeah, that makes sense. The further you get, the more likely I am to be like, I kind of don't get it. I need a little bit more, or I need a little bit different, right? Educate me. Let me sync with you because I don't quite understand that piece.
And have you gotten into any sort of complex attribution modeling? I mean, because that would start to, I would think, because some of these things are tricky. And again, I know that I mentioned the Forrester thing, and we're going to talk about metrics, and it's unacceptable for a CMO to say, well, you can't measure that. They can't do that anymore. But how close have you gotten to any of these sort of multi-touch attributions and saying, well, it's going to be these things, and we're eventually going to be revenue down here?
Has anyone really done it well is my question. It's like, that's hard. It's so hard. And the struggle is real kind of thing, right? Like this is something I think we all deal with, and we deal with it regularly. And so they talk about comp models and double comping and credits and how do you make more investment if you don't know whether or not they've touched and all that sort of stuff, right? So it's really hard. So attribution is and I think actually Isabel, I think did a good job of framing, right? And that's the holy grail. That's what I think a lot of people are looking for, is what are the metrics from an attribution perspective that say, yes, this thing is working. And I think right now in this unique moment in time, we have so much data, but it's really hard to understand and frame that data in a way that speaks to both finance and to marketing.
Right. When we spoke last time, you mentioned that when you became COO, you suddenly looked at marketing differently. And I just wondered if you could share what that perspective was as moving from CFO to COO. What changed in your mind?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's hard, right? I mean, fundamentally, when I looked at marketing prior, you would look at, okay, how much does it cost? How many FTEs do we need, et cetera, right? The difficulty is, and historically, we haven't had as much data as we do right now. And so as a result, it's really difficult to say, yes, marketing is incredibly valuable. And if I add 20% to the budget in marketing, we are going to get more than 20% from that. Really hard to establish. We have more opportunity now. Now, in my role of COO, it's a lot different because I see both the resource allocation and how we spend, where we spend, and why. A lot of times, I never had the opportunity to have education and partnership with the CMO in my CFO historic roles. And so that education is so critical. That needs to happen because you understand, CFO often has to be one of the smartest people in the room. And so it's hard as the CFO, when you're looked at as the cop and you're looked at as the smarty pants in the room, you need to be able to make calls. It is easy to cut discretionary budget. You've heard that term before, right? Discretionary, marketing is discretionary, right? You just do fewer events, right? That is not how we should be looking at it. And now that I understand more, I understand early, mid-stage, late stage, what should be done, sales support, how does that work? Air cover, what do you need? ABM, why is that working? Digital spend, right? Those are the pieces that when you understand inbound, outbound partnerships, you have all of those understandings, all of those levers, you now have a much clearer picture on why optimizing that spend is so critical and cutting it is so bad. But until you get the data and until you're educated, the CFO is helpless. That is the issue.
So there is the strategy, folks, that you really need to think about now. This is it. This is the gold mine, which is your job is to educate your CFO so they can become COO and CEO. You are going to make their career because you're going to help them understand how marketing really impacts the business. Anyway, John, thank you so much. It was really, really helpful. I appreciate you being here. I learned a lot today. I mean, I think the key takeaways: building trust with your CFO starts with your commitment to understand the finances of the company. It means creating tests with measurable outcomes and being transparent about what works and doesn't. Ideally, it's about creating a dashboard that you can agree that measures the full impact of your marketing programs in the 3 buckets that Forrester shared: marketing efficacy, brand equity, and financial value. All right. Before we go, I want to thank our special guests, Chris Andersen, Nicole Anasenes, John Evarts. All right. Well, if you've enjoyed this episode, I would encourage you to write a review, share it with a friend, give us a 5-star rating, any other things, or send me a note and just say, hey, Drew, love the episode. We really appreciate your feedback. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.